The meeting is recording, and I'll now take this adherent for the meeting of the Education Resources Committee of the 16th of March. Councillor Allison, I see that you're here. Councillor Anderson is also here. Councillor Callaghan is here. Christine Hall is here. Can I just confirm that, Christine?
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Thank you so much. Can I just check that I have Councillor Allison, Councillor Anderson, Councillor Callaghan, Councillor Convery is here, yes. Councillor Cooper, Councillor Cowie, Councillor Craig, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Donnelly, are you in attendance at the meeting today? I see that Councillor Donnelly is here, but I don't hear. Fabulous. I hear you, Councillor Donnelly. Thank you very much.
Yes. I had problems.
Thank you. Councillor Dryborough is here. Councillor Fagan.
I'm here, Pauline.
Thank you. Councillor Harrow is here. Councillor Horsham is here. Councillor Hose is here.
Here.
Councillor Loudon is here. Councillor McAdams.
I'm here, Pauline.
Thank you. Councillor McCallan.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Mars is here. Councillor Miller is here, as is Councillor Nealon and Councillor Nugent. Councillor Razak is here. Councillor Ross. No, I don't hear anything from Councillor Ross. Councillor Scott is here. Councillor Walker.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Wark is here and Councillor Watson is also here. We've established that Christine Hall is here. John Mulligan.
I'm here, yeah.
Thank you. I have apologies from Dr. Nagy Iskander and from Gillian Coulter. Andy Harvey, am I right in thinking that you're here?
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. Anne-Marie Hobson.
Apologies from Anne-Marie.
Thank you. Hilary Kirby is here and Christine Hall again is here. So with that, Chair, I'll hand over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Pauline. Well, good morning properly, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the committee. Almost a year in since things changed drastically in education, and we've had to get used to a few iterations of what the new normal has been over the past year. So thank you to everybody again on the committee for all of your contributions over the past year. I think we've said multiple times, we've put on record our thanks to school staff, teachers, staff from community and enterprise, everybody who's been involved in home learning and the return to in-person learning, everybody for all of your contributions, and parents and carers as well, and parents groups like parent councils and so on for all of the work that they have done. I would just like to briefly this morning to thank the officers who have been preparing papers and the pieces of work behind them, behind the scenes, over the past month or so for this committee, and more than a month or so in some cases, and for those of us who are taking time to come and present things to us today as well. It's another incredibly busy week as our primary pupils return and our secondary pupils return part-time, so I know that they have plenty on their plates, so I appreciate the time that they're taking to spend with the committee this morning. We've got quite a lot to get through, and I'd appreciate if you could try and keep your comments and questions pretty succinct, and we will go through as many of them as we can. So before we begin properly going through the items, do we have any declarations of interest? And that I can see, thank you. If I do, I may not be able to see all of your raised hands, depending on which particular view I'm in. So I know that Pauline's going to keep an eye out, but please let me know if I miss you putting your hand up at any point during the meeting as well. Item number 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting, which you will find in your pack. Does anybody have any comments or questions on those at the moment? Oh, I propose that we accept the minutes of the previous meeting.
Second it, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Okay, moving on then to monitoring items. We've got 3 of these just now. First one is Revenue Budget Monitoring 2020-2021, and Louise Harvey is going to take us through this. Good morning, Louise.
Good morning and thank you, Chair. This is the standard revenue report providing information on the actual expenditure against our budget for the period 1st of April through to the 29th of January, which is period 11 of our financial year. This is the 4th report presented to the committee for the financial year 2021, and the resource has now completed its formal probable outturn exercise for the year, identifying expected spend to the 31st of March, and details are outlined in section 6, which we'll come on to. We continue also to monitor and outline the specific costs incurred in relation to the resources COVID response to date. Paragraph 4 contains updated information in relation to the Scottish Attainment Challenge funding, and for PEF spend and commitment to date as at the 29th of January is 6.905 million, with 2.779 million still to spend. As previously discussed at committee, the PEF spend is expected to be impacted by the restrictions in schools are facing as a result of the pandemic, and it is anticipated that the PEF 2021 carry forward at the 31st of March will be around 2.450 million, and we're now seeing a move towards this with spend still to incur of 2.779 million as outlined. In relation to SAC, spend and commitment to date is 1.706 million, with 2.57 still to spend. And this is specific grant, and we are seeking to maximise the spend in this area in schools as only actual spend is funded. Turning to the main financial implications of the report, paragraph 6.1 outlines the forecast outturn for the resource to the end of March, with a projected overspend of 12.751 million, and this is after approved transfers of 6.261 million, and these reserves were approved at the Executive Committee as part of the overall Council probable outturn on the 10th of February. And cover the PEF carry forward, as I've mentioned above, and also early learning and childcare 1140 expansion funding, which is carrying forward to meet project commitments. So the forecast cost of COVID for the resource is 12.443 million, and this is the net effect of expenditure of 12.755 million, and this is outlined specifically in Appendix B and reflects additional education recovery teachers and support staff, the increased cost of supply teachers, expenditure incurred in the operation of the hubs during the initial lockdown, the costs of school mobilisation for August last year, and also the ongoing costs around the enhanced cleaning regimes and health and hygiene, including PPE. In addition, the resource is projecting an impact on some of our income and loss of income due to the pandemic of 564,000, and this includes early learning and childcare fees, music tuition and nursery milk, and we're also seeing some of our savings not being achieved, again as a result of the pandemic, of 99,000. Also an underspend in some areas of our budget, 975,000, and this in the main is due to expenditure not incurred on breakfast clubs and holiday lunch clubs, and also our rates budget. The Council has received funding for specific education costs relating to the pandemic, and this has been previously reported. Further funding has been received for additional staffing, digital inclusion, home learning and family support, and at this stage and this late in the financial year it's unlikely that we'll be able to spend this all this financial year, and we'll be looking to carry forward this into 2021. At the moment the figures assume full spend. So as at the 29th of January, the total revenue funding for the year has been confirmed at, the total revenue funding that we've received has been confirmed at 7.773 million. And these income sources are not netted off against the expenditure in the appendix, and instead to allow consistent reporting of expenditure in relation to the pandemic, all costs are collated and reported to the Executive Committee, but all income received is reported in its entirety. In terms of the specific resource position, at the probable outturn we were shown an overspend of 308,000, and this in the main relates to overspending costs relating to transport for both mainstream and ESN transport, some teacher costs due to the pupil growth increase, and school placements, which is a demand-led service, and this was partially offset by an underspend in early years core budgets. We're now seeing this as an improving position as we move towards the end of the financial year and expect education's core budget to be balanced, which we report later on in the year. We do have the standard budget environments, and these are proposed as set out at the bottom of Appendix A. And these cover movements within education's budget from our last report from the 6th of November through to the 29th of January. And these cover the areas around transfers from reserves to meet some of our expenditure commitments, transfers to capital for ICT, the creation of budget to reflect some external income, and the realignment of budget to reflect how we deliver our services. And again, this is mostly in early learning and childcare. And also normal activity around the devolved management scheme in schools and EMA payments. So if I can refer committee back to paragraph 2, the committee is asked to approve the recommendations as outlined. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Louise. Certainly as a report, it gives an overview of some of the complexity of the past year as well. Thank you for taking the time to go through that. Does anyone have any comments or questions on item 3 just now?
No hands raised, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Happy to accept, everyone?
Agreed.
Thank you. Now move on to item 4, which is Capital Budget Monitoring 2020-2021. It begins page 23 of your pack. And Lorraine O'Hagan is going to take us through this. Thanks, Lorraine.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Agenda item looks then at the capital budget monitoring for the year. It's the 4th report of the year, and the purpose of the report is to provide an update on the annual budget and the level of spend to 29th of January, which is accounting period 11. And in addition, for the first time this year, similar to revenue, the report also details the predicted spend position for 2021. Section 3 of your report gives the background and explains the budget position for the year, and the main point for committee to note is the revised programme, which has changed from the report to this committee back in January, and that's due to adjustments which have been agreed at Executive Committee during February 2021. The February adjustments reflect an increase of 1.327 million, and that's the addition to the programme for the purchase of Our Lady of Lourdes, and a transfer from the revenue budget for spend, more correctly classified as capital, where the budget and the funding has been transferred from the resources revenue budget, and you can see the opposite side of that in Louise's previous report. So these adjustments take the education resources programme for the year to 24.480 million. Section 5 of your report on page 24 details the financial implications and the spend to period 11 and the outturn for the year. So section 5.1 notes the revised programme for the year as being the 24.480, and spend to the 20th of January is 17.093 million, and that information is broken down in Appendix A to your report on page 26. Section 5.2 notes the outturn position against the budget, and that's an outturn of 22.2 million, so it's an underspend of 2.3 million. Section 5.3 gives a bit more detail and explains that the majority of the underspend is in relation to the timing of spend across a number of projects where the budget is required next year rather than this year. The progress of a number of projects across the council has been impacted by the ongoing lockdowns due to COVID-19, and the main projects affected for this resource are detailed in section 5.3 for your information. Section 5.4 details that the underspends in section 5.3 were offset by additional spend, and that's in relation to the early years 11 40 hours programme. Again, this is mainly a timing issue with funding for the overall spend on the programme already identified across the 2 years, so this year and next year, so there's no issue there. We'll just tidy that up at the end of the financial year. If I can then refer committee back to the recommendations in section 2 and note that the education budget of 24.480, spend to date of 17.093 and the outturn for the financial year of 22.2 be noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Any comments or questions on item 4 just now?
No hands, Chair.
Okay. Happy to accept?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lorraine. Okay, we're moving on to agenda item 5 just now, which you can find on page 27 of your pack. This is workforce monitoring, and it covers the November and December period for last year. And Aileen McPake is going to take us through this. Thanks, Aileen.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So yes, this is the standard workforce monitoring report for education resources covering the period November and December 2020. So section 4.1 of the report outlines the absence statistics for committee, and at December 2020 the absence rate for the resource was 5.5%, which is the same compared to the previous month and 0.1% lower than the council-wide figure. And that translates to a projected annual absence averaged for the resource for 2021 of 3.5% compared to a council-wide figure of 4.4%. In terms of the picture for COVID absence, the council-wide picture at the beginning of February was a council-wide absence rate of 5.65%, and 1.53% of that is related to COVID, sickness, absence and special leave. Section 4.2 outlines that there were 333 occupational health referrals made during the period, which is an increase of 13 compared to the same period last year. Section 4.3 states there was 104 accidents and incidents within the period, and 91 of these relate to physical incidents. Section 4.4 outlines there was no disciplinary hearings during the period. There was 2 grievances during the period and no dignity at work issues were raised. Section 4.5 shows that there was 12 leavers across the resource during the period, and 33% of these completed exit interviews. Appendix 2.8 gives details of vacant posts and shows that there was 33 posts that became vacant during the period, and managers indicated that all of these would be filled. So if I can just refer committee back to section 2 and ask that the contents of the reports be noted. Thank you.
Thank you very much for going through that, Aileen. Any comments or questions on this item?
No hands raised, Chair.
None that I can see. Okay, happy to accept, everyone.
Agreed.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're moving on then to our items for decision. We've got 2 of these today. First one is item 6, which begins on page 35. And this is on the Youth, Family and Community Learning Service, and it's about Kickstart Scheme placements, not very easy to say. And Anne Donaldson's going to take us through this. Good morning, Anne.
Good morning, thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report then is to provide an update on job placements within the Youth, Family and Community Learning Service as part of the Council's participation in the Department of Work and Pensions Kickstart scheme, and to seek approval for the establishment of a Youth, Family and Community Learning Officer to be established on a fixed term basis in the Education Resources Establishment. Moving on then to section 3, which offers some background in relation to the project, and paragraph 3.1 describes how, as a result of the Council's successful application to the recently announced Kickstart scheme, 6 job opportunities will be made available within Youth, Family and Community Learning Service. The job opportunities will give young people the chance to build their skills in the workplace and to gain experience to improve their chances of finding long-term work. Paragraph 3.2 describes how the placements are on a fixed term basis for 26 weeks, and paragraph 3.3 further describes that the Council will fund a 26-week extension, which in reality will mean a 52-week job placement for the young people. Section 4 gives some more information about the placement opportunity, and paragraph 4.2 lists the kinds of activities that the young people can expect to be involved in. And what I would ask members to note is that young people will participate in the breadth of the work of the service and not be in a very narrow focus. Section 5 then describes the proposal that it's proposed that a post of a Youth, Family and Community Learning Service officer be established on a fixed term basis from April 21 for the duration of the placements. And the purpose of this post is to allow the trainees to be managed and mentored, and to give them the appropriate supervision and appropriate level of training, support, direction and ongoing development opportunities within the Youth, Family and Community Learning Service. Section 6 describes the employee implications and the costs for that post. And section 7 explains that all costs associated with the support of the Kickstart job placement will be met from external funding and employability budgets, and funding for the officer will be met from within existing budgets. I would also ask members to note that we are being funded at the national minimum wage, but the Council has topped that up to the living wage for the young people who will be involved. Turning back then to paragraph 2 and the recommendations, the committee is asked to approve the following recommendations: that a Youth, Family and Community Learning Officer post be established on a fixed term basis as detailed in paragraph 5 of the report, and that the intended impact and outcomes for participants be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Anne. As this is an item for decision, I propose that we accept the recommendations.
Second that, Chair.
Thanks, Peter. Any comments or questions on this item just now? The one person.
We have councillors Allison and Callahan who want to ask a question, Chair.
Councillor Allison, thanks, Pauline. Councillor Allison, then, please.
Thanks, Chair. Start off with these horrible words. I welcome this report. It's certainly needed in the way forward and being able to support people coming out of education. I'm a little bit curious as to, we've just went through a budget process where there was no requirement indicated at that time for a full-time officer. So as you've said, it's from within current budgets. So what money is not going to be spent elsewhere to allow the funding of this post? And why wasn't it brought up at the budget process?
I think the issue is in terms of timing of the project. I see that has maybe Louise has got a comment to make. The cost will be absorbed from within existing budgets, so perhaps vacancies won't be filled or pointages will be used and used redirected to support this post. But it is seen as an important post in terms of being able to support the young people to get the best out of their actual experience for their long-term benefit. But I would say that it's in relation to the timing of the initiative more than anything else.
Thank you, Anne. Councillor Callahan.
Thanks, Katie. And I'm just wondering, I'm just looking at it and seeing that the council have done an additional extension for another 26 weeks, and I'm just interested in whether that means that the whole training, if you like, has been spread over a longer period of time, or whether it's still kind of keeping to the 6 months of kind of intensive training, and then it's going to be much more work experience based and honing those skills. Thanks.
I think again the installation of an officer to oversee this means that they can actually start to mentor and monitor the needs of the young people. What I would say is that we have people within the service who are training officers already, so they do have the skills and abilities to look at the young people as individuals and actually map an individualised pathway for them. The opportunities that come to the young people in future won't also be within the Youth, Family and Community Learning Service, they'll be council-wide. So the extension also gives the opportunity of more extensive, as you described, work experience across the breadth of the work. So it does enhance the experience of the young people that are brought on board.
That sounds great. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Any further questions?
Chair, we have Louise Harvey's indicated that she wants to come in and have a word.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks, Pauline.
Yeah, it was just to add to the last point by Councillor Allison there. It's funded, the Youth, Family and Community Learning Officer is funded from within the existing budgets through vacancies and turnover. So it is existing budget, but we generally have a reasonable level of turnover in there, and that's how it will be funded. So it was just to confirm the point that Anne had said.
Thank you very much, Louise. Okay, if there's no further comments or questions, this has been proposed and seconded. Are we happy to accept the recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Thank you for going through that, Anne, and my best wishes to the officer and to all of the young people who are going to be involved in this project over the next year or so as well. Thanks. Okay, the second item for decision is item 7, which begins on page 39. This is an update on the delivery of 1140 hours early learning and childcare, and Stuart Nicholson's going to take us through this. Good morning, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. The purpose of this paper today is to provide an update on the progress made in the expansion towards 1140 hours of funded early years provision against the context of the current pandemic, and to provide an update too on the reinstatement of the statutory duty on education authorities to make 1140 hours of funded early learning available to 3 to 5 year olds and eligible 2-year-olds from August 2021. The paper also seeks approval for a number of posts, as I'll come on shortly. But from the outset, I think I'd want to note that this is something of a landmark moment for us, as this puts into place the final piece in an extraordinarily complex workforce plan and takes us very close indeed to crossing the finish line as far as the 1140 expansion goes. Section 3 of the paper reminds us that the statutory requirement to deliver the 1140 programme by August 2020 was removed in recognition of the disruption caused by the current pandemic. Para 3.2 notes that despite that, we continue to progress as best we could, and that the majority of our children are now accessing beyond the statutory minimum, indeed up to 1140 hours. Para 3.2 notes that the statutory duty has been reinstated as of August 2021. Section 4 sets out the current context. So following lockdown, our nurseries reopened from the 22nd of February. Care inspections restarted, albeit in a virtual format, and our programmes of training, support and guidance continued. Para 4.4 notes that we've got over 7,700 children in our nurseries this year, just under 5,400 in local authority settings and 2,362 with our funded providers. All of the funded provider places are 1140 hours, and in total, 86% of our children access up to the 1140 hours or beyond the statutory minimum. Para 4.5 notes that we actually have capacity now for up to 92% of places, but what we found is that families have chosen not to move on to an 1140, a full 1140 place mid-session, preferring to stay where they are. Appendix 1 gives us an update on progress with the building programme, and despite the pandemic, I'm delighted to report that all but one of the planned projects is now either open or on track to do so soon, and the one remaining project is currently being progressed with interim plans in preparation for August. So again, we're getting very close to where we would want to be or where we will need to be come August. Para 4.6 notes the ongoing support for our funded providers, and a note that we now have over 110, I think we're about 111, 112 currently, with a few more to be added on our procured service agreement, which compares to the 58 we had at the start of the process 3-4 years ago. And many of those are childminders who've come in to formal agreements with us. Section 5 sets out our proposal for the funded provider rate to be paid next year, noting a move towards the alignment of rates across the 8 local authorities in the West Partnership. The proposed rates for the coming session are £6.40 for eligible 2-year-olds and £5.81 for the 3 to 5-year-olds, and in each case that includes 50p towards the free meal provision. Section 6 provides some information in relation to the financial support that's been provided to our funded providers during the pandemic, a particularly challenging time for them. The Council continued to pay 100% of the contract to providers, whether they were open or whether they elected to close. We administered the payment of some of the grant funding that was provided by Scottish Government, including the transitional funding, the monthly temporary restrictions funding, and we've also provided places for the children of key workers in the event that their funded providers elected to remain closed. Section 7 sets out a number of next steps, the final steps, if you like, towards August, in terms of admissions, in terms of finalising accommodation, care inspectorate registrations, the recruitment activity, and the implementation of the national standard, and of course the partnership, as I've said, with funded providers. Sections 7.4 to 7.9 set out the rationale for the posts required to finalise the expansion programme, and those are detailed in tables 1 and 2. Table 1 covering over 110 permanent term time and 52-week posts, and Table 2 a further 10 mainly temporary posts required to complete the programme and to manage the transition into full programme delivery. Section 8 notes the financial implications and confirms that the costs can be met within the revenue budget of £32.227 million, and Section 9 confirms that the employee implications have also been considered by Finance and Corporate Resources. Para 9.2 points to Appendix 2. I think one of the things for me is we acknowledge that those posts, far from being numbers on the table, translate into real people. And this appendix shows some of the ways in which those people are engaged in training and development to secure the best for our youngest learners. And within that context, we've spoken several times about the Grow Your Own policy, which is providing many of the modern apprentice places or many of the modern apprentice candidates for our current team. Moving on, section 11 has been a permanent feature of the 1140 reports we brought to committee, an acknowledgement that this has been an ongoing area of significant risk for the council. And while we can now see the finish line and we are increasingly confident in terms of our progress, please be assured we're far from complacent and will continue to take the steps that we require to take in order to get to where we need to be. So can I therefore refer committee back to the recommendations in section 2 and ask that the content of the report be noted, that the sustainable rate for funded providers for 2021-22 is detailed in para 5.2 be approved, and that approval be granted to increased establishment within education resources as detailed in sections 7.4 to 7.9 of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I like the analogies at the start about nearly being at the finishing line and just sliding the last couple of pieces into what has been a very complex puzzle, especially given the circumstances over the last year. Thanks for going through all of that. I've got a couple of councillors waiting to speak just now. I'll start with Councillor Harold, please.
Your mute's on.
Oh, sorry. Right. Thanks. One of our councillors in Bothwell has noticed that the proposed site for a nursery is in a kind of a busy street with a new development proposed, and it's going to get quite congested. Have other sites been considered for this?
A number of other sites were considered, including one in Appledore Crescent, which, as a result of concerns from the local community, was not progressed. We're aware of the issues. One of the issues in Bothwell is the lack of available places and sites, and there was a significant activity looking at a number of sites or a number of possibilities across there, and the current proposed site at Clyde Terrace is one of those. And as I understand it, as part of the planning process, a full analysis of the implications for the traffic and traffic management is being submitted.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Fagan.
Thanks, Chair. And I will say the development of the rooftop nursery in East Kilbride, I thought, I know we're not going to get the chance to see it, I suppose, in person for some time, but I think it was we'll just say at the outset, I think it was quite encouraging to see a different use for what is essentially an indoor shopping centre, and it was just encouraging to see some sort of innovative thinking around where we could put that nursery. Just got some straightforward questions. Already it's been touched on the move towards the 1140 target that's been put back to this year, and there's some sort of narrative in there about where we sit. When do we think we'll get to that 100%? Do we think that will be when the target is the sort of deadline, or do we think it will happen before then? On the West Scotland hub, and I've got this, I mean, I know there's a whole discussion around the purpose of these hubs, but I'm just wondering, like, practically, what are the kind of benefits of that sort of cooperation? What are the practical advantages to having that sort of consistency around the hourly rate? I was just curious to get a kind of officer's input into that one. And the final point is just in relation to the rollout of the living wage and promotion of the living wage amongst our partners, which is obviously part of our ambitions going forward. I'm just wondering what the current position is in relation to the living wage elsewhere. So it's just 3 straightforward questions from me, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Stuart.
Thanks, Councillor Fagan. In terms of moving to meet the deadline, in Appendix 1 you'll see the schedule for the completion of the new nurseries. So I guess our intent is that we will be able to offer 100% of eligible families the entitlement come August, and as we progress through the planning we'll make more places available. I think what we are finding just now is that families are pretty settled in the places that they're in, and rather than moving into a new 1140 place, they'll continue to take the 600 hours that they've got. And of course, by taking a 600-hour place, they're not only not taking the available 1140 place to prevent somebody else from taking 1140 in there, so there's a kind of double whammy. But my understanding, and I think the work that's ongoing with the current admissions process, is that we're very confident that we will have 100% places available come August, and notwithstanding the issues in Bothwell, I think the planning that's in place is to do something to make sure that the families in that area are also accommodated. The move towards the alignment of the rate, you'll be aware that over the last couple of years we've had significant discussion with partners about rates and what was fair and what wasn't fair, and expectations. And we undertook the activity with Ipsos Mori to review the costs and the expenditure to ensure that what we had was a fair model. And what we felt was across the 8 local authorities, having those discussions to ensure that there's a consistency of approach, because many of those providers are operating in more than one of the authorities, including a number that provide for us and are in North Lanarkshire, for example. So it's about ensuring a fairness and a consistency of approach. And in terms of the third question around living wage, one of the things our expectation is that the funded providers will pay the living wage, but it's not something that we are in a position to be able to mandate. And I don't have current figures on what their intent is or what they intend paying. And that's something I dare say we could be able to find out and progress.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you. Just to add to Councillor Fagan's comments about Rooftops Nursery, when we saw the photographs recently, the recent press release, it looks absolutely incredible. It really does. And it, as you know, Councillor said, it's one thing to picture it and see the plans, but to actually see what it looks like, it's an incredible use of space. And I'm sure that both of us will get to go along at some point in the near future. We've got Councillor Cooper next. Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you. I wanted to make a point about the move towards the rationalisation of across the 8 partnerships. I'm pleased to see that happening, Stuart, because in the past we've discussed the issue of the drift of staff moving between authorities because they're getting paid a higher rate in one place than they are in another. And I think it's a very sensible move to rationalise that across authorities. Can I ask you about on page 44, the temporary fixed term posts? And I know that there's 4 quality officer posts there. Are these new posts or could they have been subsumed into part of the remit of a primary quality officers post as they have been in the past?
These are quality officers who've been in place as part of the expansion, providing support both to local authority establishments, but also to the funded providers. And it's extending those contracts to run for a period of time in terms of the transition. The early years team sits separate to the CQIS, but of course we are expecting closer working between the primary sector and the early years sector. So that's something certainly we can bear in mind in terms of the remits of the other QIOs.
That's great, thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Stuart. Councillor Allison, please.
Apologies, Chair. I'm going to go back to Ian Tara's point regarding Bothwell. Or first of all, to concur with others, the move the officers have made in getting 1140 in place in the middle of a COVID pandemic is certainly worth noting and need to be thanked very much for that. But the last one on this list is Bothwell. And I'm led to believe from local representation that the site they are currently looking at is no better than the one that was rejected. A lot of work was done by a local member in going out with officers, identifying sites, but the problem was that the sites that were deemed to be acceptable weren't owned by the council. Now, whereas I can understand the need to keep budgets, etc., in line, to go with a site that is not seen to be really acceptable locally, just because of that finance, I don't think is a good idea. Can Stuart tell us at all if the sites that were identified as being acceptable but not within the council ownership, how much extra it would cost to have utilised those sites?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think I've got Tony McDade wanting to come in as well, so I don't know which one of you wants to take that just now, but we've got Tony as well.
Thanks, Chair. I'll maybe take that just now, and it's not just about the private site, it's that we were unable to use that budget in order to purchase those private sites. The second part as well, there is a planning application in, and obviously in terms of due diligence, that will go through the planning process, and there's been extensive discussion and consultation. I take Councillor Allison's point that some people within the local community have a particular viewpoint, and that will obviously go through the planning processes. There are other people within the community that have an alternative viewpoint about the appropriateness of the centre itself and the position of the centre. What we would hope is that the natural process and the planning committee will get to hear all of those arguments and be able to decide the appropriateness of that site itself. We do believe we've got a very strong case, Councillor Allison, but I would accept in all of these situations, as you will know, that there can be a variety of opinion, but we have, for reassurance, we have had due diligence with it, we have had extensive consultation within the community itself, but ultimately there is a next step within this.
Sorry, can I come back, Chair?
Yeah, supplementary.
Tony, it's two different questions. Going to planning is evaluating the suggestions that have been put in place. It's not about the principle within education of where we want that facility to be. It's two different questions, I think, and whether or not that site is the best one or not is not what planning are going to be looking at. They're going to be looking at specifics for that. And therefore, I'm back to the original question. Were the sites that were identified locally out with the council ownership ever evaluated and costed?
Yeah, we've done extensive consultation, and in fact in the local elected members and indeed the financing of that as well, Councillor Allison. So this has been an exhaustive process. You're quite right. We have put forward what we believe is the best option in the circumstances, and we wouldn't have done that had we not thought that that was the case.
Thank you, Tony. Councillor Watson.
Thanks. It's just to follow up on that point about Bothwell. My understanding of that, and notwithstanding the planning application, Tony, which will take care of itself from planning constraints, but the actual location of it is not the best location from the point of public transport. And also it's in a built-up residential area with a school near it as well. But again, I go back to surely the whole ethos of when we were looking at these early years establishment, it was to be accessible for public transport as well. And maybe I'm wrong here because I don't know Bothwell that well, but the comment was made to me that there's non-existent transport links near that facility.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Again, as part of the, so we would have an active transport activity. I see that Lynn has put her hand up to this as well, so probably Lynn has had a heavy involvement with the active transport. Councillor Loudon, I would maybe suggest if Lynn wanted to come in on that.
Sure, thanks Tony. Morning, Lynn.
Morning. It's maybe just to say very quickly that we do factor that in. We do consider in broad terms how families get themselves to our centres, whether they do walk, whether they take their own transport or whether they take public transport. There are links, and it is down from the main road coming through Bothwell and Uddingston, but there are routes there. But we are doing a bit of an analysis, asking our other establishments about how parents get themselves to facilities, and there isn't huge public transport use of getting children to our nurseries. That's what our information is showing us. So we have factored these kind of things into the planning application and the considerations that we looked at before we move forward with the planning application. We are being asked, you're right, Tony's right, there is different views out there about whether this is the right place or not. And we have been asked several questions about transport links and many other things, which we've been able to answer. So we will see what unfolds when we get to planning committee, but we do think we've factored in a number of these things as best we can.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I would take one final point of this just now, which is from Councillor Craig.
Thanks, Chair. Bothwell was always going to be a really difficult place to site a nursery, and that we recognised that, both yourself, Chair, and me, at the very start of this process, and we did consult with all the local councillors at the time to try and gain their local knowledge to find the best place to site the nursery. And to be fair to local councillors, they've been really helpful in trying to do that. So as a nursery, it's an absolutely essential thing for a community. Like all planning applications, there will be people who have different views, but there's been no effort spared in trying to find the right site for this. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and absolutely I concur with your point about thanking local members for their input into this as well. Okay, so we've got no further questions. This is an item for decision, so I'm going to propose that we accept the recommendations at section 2.
And second it, Chair.
Thank you. All agreed?
Agreed.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks. That was our final item for decision. We're now moving on to items for noting. Our first one is on response to remote learning, January 2021, and Carol Mackenzie is going to take us through this. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, this is a report outlining our response to the ask that was made nationally that schools move to a remote learning model from January 2021. Section 3 provides a summary of the background to this, and members will be aware that, as the Chair referred to right at the beginning of the meeting, it's been almost a year since schools were asked to temporarily close their doors to most between March and June 2020 initially, and then everybody returned again in August. And I think it's fair to say that the background sets out that we learned from this first period of lockdown. It came very suddenly. I think it is fair to say that we had approaches as we collectively came to terms with what was being asked of us. So what we did as a resource and together in partnership with our schools and with our professional associations was we used that initial period of lockdown when schools were closed to most to learn some lessons there and to reflect on the offers that we had provided. And we worked hard between August and December last year to ensure that should another ask be made of us to move to remote learning for a short or a longer period, that other schools were well equipped and most importantly well supported, so that if we were asked to move to remote learning, we were fully ready. So there was a lot of support given to schools. We met with head teachers, we provided support materials, we spoke to staff, and we, I think most crucially, provided an intensive period of training, especially around the use of digital learning. So to conclude the background, section 3, I think it's fair to say by December, we were in a very strong position, not knowing particularly at that stage what was ahead of us, but we were in a strong position to move to an improved and a more robust remote learning offer should we be asked to do so. And we were asked very quickly, just at the very tail end of the Christmas holidays, that schools would move into this period of remote learning from January 2021. And it did happen very suddenly, and we appreciate that, given the changing nature of COVID, that was the ask that was made of us. But we were in a strong position at that stage to put our work from August to December into play. Head teachers were mobilised and rose beautifully to the occasion of delivering on this challenge. And all our schools, subject to some children who still attended school in person during that period, moved to this period of remote learning from the 11th of January 2021. So section 4 sets out how we responded to this. We provided schools with sets of guiding principles. We didn't provide them with a you must and you will. We provided them with principles in order that they could each create their own offer that would best reflect their own school context and circumstances. But we did ask that each school's offer was robust. It was, it had proper cognizance of the needs of their families and their communities. And we asked each school to submit an outline of their plan so we could have a bit of central monitoring of what that would look like. So we were actually blown away by our school's response to this ask, and that's not just from head teachers but from staff at all levels, including our teaching staff and our support staff. We asked schools to complete an audit quite early on in this process so we could get a little handle on maybe some of the issues that were emerging quickly, so we could help fix these with schools. So we asked schools to complete quite a comprehensive survey very near the beginning of this period, which became a baseline audit for us to have a look at what was working and where perhaps schools needed more support. And they were asked a series of questions around digital learning, about the way they were delivering lessons, about how they were tracking pupils' engagement, and how crucially they were responding to the feedback of stakeholders, including parents and carers. We also asked them questions around what resources they were using, because in the interim period between June 2020 and December, there was a myriad of resources, including a very successful West Online School platform that was developed, and we wanted to check that our schools were fully accessing all the resources available. We then followed this up with a second audit in February, mid-February, and we were very heartened to learn that almost all schools had continued to improve their offer from the 11th of January. So to mark the kind of, we have reached the end for now of remote learning in terms of our schools are back for primary schools. There is still remote learning going on in secondary schools between now and the spring break. But to mark the kind of end of the full period of remote learning, we decided to compile a report using the evidence that we found from our audit, but also using some feedback that we'd received from schools and from stakeholders. We asked schools to submit you know, what their parents had said about their own offers, what their teachers had said. We asked them to submit, you know, positive emails and comments they'd received. We wanted the report that accompanies this committee report to provide a comprehensive account of the response of all our schools. We wanted it to be evidence-based, and we wanted it to reflect the real words and views of our stakeholders. So members are asked to note the appendix that accompanies this committee report, which really forms the bulk of what I'm presenting today. And that report provides both accountability to the way we responded to this. It doesn't claim that it was a perfect response, so it identifies some areas where we still think further work would be needed should we move into another period of remote learning. But I hope members find that a useful reflection of the work that our schools collectively have done together. And members will note that the feedback that we have received in general from parents, carers and from young people themselves has been really very positive, you know, despite the challenges and the undoubted challenges this period has presented to us. So the report that accompanies this report is really, you know, almost like a standards and quality around a remote learning offer. It is quite a long read, but hopefully a valuable one. So with that in mind, I'd like to refer members back to the recommendation in section 2 that committee is asked to approve the response to our delivering a remote learning offer, and that the content of the remote learning audit as detailed in Appendix 1 be noted. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Carol, for going through that. As you said, a long read, but a very worthwhile one, and I particularly like and appreciate the quotes from parents and carers and young people themselves, which are used in it. I've got a couple of questions just now. I'll take Councillor Drybra, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was really just to say thanks very much for the report. I think it is very lengthy, and I think I really like seeing the case studies in there. But one of the things I just wanted to highlight that I could see especially going on in my own ward was, I think that what was being delivered was was really greatly improved, and obviously there was devices out there, but I think that the teaching staff have really, I've seen them going really above and beyond in order to get families to engage.
Yeah.
Because whilst it wasn't necessarily not having a device that was an issue, it wasn't the offer that was an issue. There was just, in certain cases there was a lack of engagement, and I've seen so much work going on, and I think, I'm not sure that sort of comes across in the report, but I do think that there's been a massive amount of work in engaging with families across the board, and I think, really, I think teaching staff have really got to be commended for the amount of work they've put into that. Thanks.
Yeah. It was impossible to reflect everything without making it, double the size. But I absolutely take the point, and we'll pass that back. But we have seen teachers, support staff, and head teachers go above and beyond to ensure their families and communities are engaging.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Councillor. I'll take Councillor Nayland, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say, again, the well-worn phrase, I welcome this report. As the parent of a secondary school child, I've been aware of the challenges both for the child at home and for the staff doing the best to put things in place. There's been a massively marked improvement for the second lockdown for the scope of lessons that have been available online. I'd like to extend thanks to all concerned for that, IT and the staff, for making it possible. I know that as the children are going back into school, that's presenting challenges as staffing resources are stretched. They can't be in the classroom and they can't be online at the same time. So there's a little bit of a vacuum element going off here. But I'd just like to say, if you could extend my personal thanks, I'd be very appreciative.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Harrow.
Hopefully I'm not on mute this time. Now that we're going back, the children are going back to school, is there going to be some kind of differentiation even made between those who engaged with the online learning and those who didn't? Because if there isn't, the people who did engage are going to find it a bit of a turn off if they're going to be covering the same work that they've already done, so that those who didn't can catch up. Have we kind of pondered that at all? Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. It's undoubtedly going to be a challenge for schools as they welcome all the children back. And one of the key jobs, you're absolutely right, is to make sure that the classroom teachers know and get to know exactly where their children are. And what we don't want to do, we don't want to assume that everybody has had a loss of learning. We don't want to run a deficit model, but there absolutely has to be some gentle assessment and feedback, and based on, as you say, that engagement period, but also about some skills that children may have actually enhanced during this period, that it is going to have to be a period of reflection and recovery. And when I use the word assessment, I don't necessarily mean, formal testing, but there will have to be a baselining just to establish where the children are. Any gaps need to be identified, and we will be encouraging schools during the summer term, so May to June, to very much use that period as a chance to get everybody back in, to ensure well-being, health and well-being is at the forefront of everybody's agenda, but absolutely start to look at the literacy and the numeracy, any gaps that may emerge, and to use that period really as a period of reflection, baselining, to ensure that the planning, particularly from August 21, is robust and designed to meet any needs that may have emerged, as you say, during the lockdown period.
Thanks very much, Carol. Thanks, Councillor. I've got Councillor Allison, please.
Yeah, just following on from Carol or Tony, I think that is important, being able to identify where the deficits are, but then how we address it. Is there a paper going to come to committee to identify how we are going to address these issues? Significant funds were made available in the budget process, so I think it would be good that we could get as quickly as possible an update after the evaluations you've talked about have been done as to how we're going to address these issues.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor. I've got Tony McDade wanting to come in on that as well, I think.
Thanks, Councillor Larson. I'm sure Carol's possibly going to say the same thing. You actually, I think you maybe answered your own question at the end there, in the sense that we will carry out a needs analysis. It's really important that we ask our schools, our teachers, our head teachers, our children and community about exactly what they think they need to do within the community itself. So you're quite right. We will bring a further paper to the next committee that will outline the work that we'll undertake, but we really do need to carry out that analysis based on the evidence that we see and based on what schools see when the children and young people come back. But you're quite right, we will bring further information back.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tony. Okay, so more information coming to the next committee then as well. I would also just like to put my own personal thanks on the record as well. I know that there's a number of us in here who have been juggling with home learning alongside everything else. I've got one back in full time at the moment, and the eagle-eyed amongst you may have seen me shushing my my eldest son who's still home learning at the moment. But the support which we've received has been fantastic, and more so it's meant an awful lot to them to still have that connection with their teachers and their peers as well. So it's been as good as we could have hoped for over the past few months. I've got Councillor Mars, and then that's the last comment I'll be able to take on this one just now. Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I think I am with you on that. I think we're about a quarter of Kirkhill Bank Primary School just from my family alone. So homeschooling has been an experience. I think there is definitely some positives to have been taken, and I'm well aware from hearing from some people that maybe find social situations more challenging and formal learning difficult. That I'm certainly hearing comments for the remote learning, however imperfect it was, actually for some proportion of our young people was really beneficial. I think that learning can be taken forward in terms of how we support our young people with additional support needs, and simply offering a different way and a different way to learn at a time that suits them, and and actually achieves a good educational outcome. I think I'd also pay tribute to the staff who have worked extremely hard with parent councils. Parent councils throughout this time, they've moved online almost entirely across the board. I don't think there's very many that I'm aware of that haven't been meeting online, and staff have again absolutely went above and beyond. We've seen an increase in the attendance of parent councils who have been a forum for communication and support for families, and again just a really fabulous engagement. And we all know how important it is for our young people that school is an engagement with a whole family, not just the young person. So I think there's huge benefits to that as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor. Thanks everyone for your contributions. Are we happy to accept the recommendations in the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, moving on then to item 9, is another item for noting. Begins on page 85 of your pack, and this is on supporting the alternative method for Isqe certification, and Stuart Nicholson's going to take us through this. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on current and future SQA moderation activities to support the national qualifications of our young people in the senior phase. And the background to this paper is basically that the SQA exam diet for 2021 has been cancelled. That was announced initially in October for National 5 qualifications, and then later in December for higher and advanced higher qualifications. That's an important distinction to make, because while our schools were planning for an internal assessment programme, if you like, for National 5 candidates, they were still working towards normal exams, so to speak, for the higher and advanced higher candidates right up to the middle of December, and that would have included preparing a diet of prelims, and those in many schools were planned for January. As you're aware, the return in January did not happen as a result of the January lockdown, and as a result of that and the consequent or the subsequent limited return of senior phase pupils, schools have had to quite radically rethink their assessment strategy. Section 4 notes that the SQA has developed a 5-stage alternative certification model. That was initially designed for National 5 and then adapted to accommodate higher and advanced higher as well. And in particular, they want to address a couple of the issues that they faced last season. You will recall that it was a particularly, if you like, turbulent period in terms of the management of the certification process. Para 4.2 notes 2 significant changes implemented for the current session. Firstly, there will be no adjustment to grades for inferred attainment, so awards will be based solely on the evidence that pupils are able to demonstrate through their assessment programmes. And secondly, one of the big issues last year was the notion of an SQA algorithm. There will be no algorithm applied this year, so the SQA will accept the grades awarded by schools this session, and certainly, I think quite rightly, that they're showing a strong confidence in teacher judgments. But the point of the 5-stage process is to ensure, I think, that I suppose the initial expectation that an A in Annan is the same as an A in Aberdeen, or in our case maybe a B in Blantyre is the same as a B in Bothwell. The stages are summarised in Para 5. Essentially, the model is front-loaded. The expectation is that all of our staff who are involved in certification processes this year are involved in training and engagement to ensure that they've got a common awareness and a secure understanding of the standards to be applied, and that their assessment decisions are then supported by a quality assurance process. So in-school moderation activities, cross-marking, cross-checking, verification of assessments, and local authority level moderation across subject areas too. The SQA will then sample pupil evidence from a selection of subjects in each of our schools and provide feedback in terms of their own assessment decisions. And finally, the schools then will undertake internal sense checks of the results at subject level, and we in Education Resources will carry out similar checks with the schools to get an overview of the processes, the decisions, and to understand some of the assessment activity that's taken place. The schools have a deadline to submit results to SQA by the 25th of June. That's the end of the school term. That late date gives the maximum time to allow young people to demonstrate their attainment. The principle being that in terms of the ongoing assessment activity, the gathering and assessment and evaluation of evidence, that it should be a no surprises approach, that young people through the ongoing learner conversations and communication will be aware by June of the grades that they're likely to have, that they're going to have, and those will not, as I say, be amended by SQA. So the proposal is that it will be a no surprises type model. Section 5 describes some of the structures we have in place to support the work from a local authority point of view. We've established subject networks in previous years, and those are led by specialist teachers, and they support planning and professional engagement across the authority, and that would include some of the local moderation activity. Each of those networks is supported by a senior manager from one of our schools, and they in turn work with our central quality team as a means of providing a consistency of support and a consistency of approach. We've already had a South Lanarkshire-wide event in February for all subject teachers in their subject networks, and that provided the opportunity to discuss and engage the assessment processes, and indeed in some cases to start consideration of pupil type evidence. We're currently engaging with schools around the timing and focus for the additional in-service days provided to support assessment, as well as planning for the May in-service day to that purpose as well. In Section 6, we note that the CQIS service manager is engaging with schools to look beyond the individual subject processes and to support them in the use of data around sense checking activities to make sure there's a rigour and a consistency of approach in preparation for quality assurance meetings in May and June with ourselves as a central team. We are aware that this is very much an anxious time for candidates, and we're engaging directly with them, firstly through consultation activity, and that will also lead to a focus group type activity to allow us to better understand, I suppose, the issues from their own perspectives, and to work with them to provide both support and reassurance in terms of what's going to happen over the next few months. So I'd refer committee to Section 2 of the paper and ask for approval of the recommendations that the planned local quality assurance and moderation activity in schools to support the national qualifications of learners in the senior phase be noted, and that the ongoing support being provided to secondary schools across South Lanarkshire also be noted. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stuart. A tremendous amount of work has been undertaken in this area and continues to be, so thank you for going through that with us just now. Does anybody have any comments or questions at the moment? Oh, happy to accept the report.
Agreed.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, moving on to our next item then, which is item 10, begins on page 89. And this is a general update on the resource in the wake of COVID-19, and Des Dixon is going to take us through this. Good morning, Des.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chair. This is what I might describe as a kind of wrap-up and a kind of dynamic report, because when we started writing it prior to coming on the journey for the Education Committee, we've had to adapt and change it as we've moved along. And in many cases, it touches on what other colleagues have mentioned this morning. So if you bear with me, I'll walk you through the journey. So the purpose of the report is to provide an update on the ever-changing response to COVID-19 by our schools and nurseries, and of course council services, including community resources who look after our janitors, our cleaners and our catering staff. So in paragraph 3.1, we describe how schools and nurseries looked forward to welcoming back on Monday the 22nd of February all children in early years, and around 10,400 children in P1 to P3, along with some of our senior pupils in S4 to S6 to undertake some essential practical work, as well as schools supporting vulnerable children and those of key workers. So quite a challenge. In paragraph 3, I think as colleagues and members of this committee have acknowledged this morning, it's been a monumental effort of staff right across the council to prepare schools and nurseries for a safe return of children and young people, and to do this in a way that provided staff with reassurance, pupils and parents with reassurance in terms of safety, infection control, our safe systems of work, our personal hygiene, and of course the physical distancing measures which are designed to keep everyone safe. And it's worth noting, as colleagues have mentioned this morning, that our head teachers, staff and trade unions have been and continue to be key partners in this preparation and planning for a return to school. This morning we touch on paras 3.4 and 3.5, and we touch on the excellent strides made in respect of remote learning and digital inclusion, building on the Council's investment in these two areas, which we heard more about from Carol and Stuart earlier this morning. In section 4, on pages 90 and 91, we have shown the timeline and the principles which were set out for all local authorities in respect of the phased return of pupils. And in paragraph 4.2, members of the committee will see that as of yesterday, our primary and ESN schools welcome back all pupils in P4 to P7, which has been warmly welcomed by the pupils themselves, staff, and of course their parents and families. And yesterday, of course, saw the start of the phased return of more secondary age pupils to school, with the priority group being S4 to S6, but being mindful of the requirement needed to timetable and plan around the 2-metre distancing rule for all secondary age pupils whilst they're in school. They offer to all pupils to experience some in-school return, whilst taking account of what could still be offered through remote learning and the 1-metre distance when travelling on school transport. So again, whilst welcoming the return of more pupils back to school, there can be no doubt that this has been a huge challenge for everyone, and particularly for our secondary schools at this stage. They have, following the announcement by the First Minister on the 2nd of March on phase 2 return to school, had to adapt at fairly short notice their plans, their timetables, and taking account of the principles which are highlighted in paragraph 4.7 and some of the practical arrangements that have had to be carefully thought through on a school-by-school basis, the details of which I've highlighted in paragraphs 4.8 to 4.10. And clearly, the key milestones being to put in place arrangements for all learners from S1 to S6 to experience some time back in school between yesterday and up until the spring break is a key priority. A key phase to meeting challenges of this kind is always to provide support and to keep in touch with those involved. So in section 5, we provide an insight into some of the communication and engagement activities which have been undertaken and continue to be undertaken under the theme Keeping Connected. This includes dialogue, face-to-face meetings with head teachers, heads of early years establishments, our ASN schools, our parents and carers, and as we've heard this morning, parent councils, and of course the constant dialogue that we have with our professional associations and including our health professionals in North Lanarkshire, nearly made a mistake there, and NHS, Lanarkshire, and indeed Health Protection Scotland, and that reflects some of the points made by members this morning, which is grateful. In paragraph 6, we provided an insight into the journey of testing and vaccination programmes which are in place to more readily identify those adults and young people who are asymptomatic. And notably, Untitled Grammar School was one of 8 schools throughout Scotland who were involved in the PCR pilot tests, and that featured on national television, which was a forerunner to the rollout of lateral testing for staff in schools and senior pupils as part of a Scottish and UK programme through the Department of Health and Social Care. And I'm certainly pleased today to confirm that the rollout of lateral testing kits to those pupils in S1 to S3 and to staff in standalone nurseries will now take place, with test kits expected to be delivered before the spring break, which of course is good news and provides further reassurance and confidence for staff, pupils and parents alike. And of course we continue to liaise with public health on a daily basis to deal with positive cases, and we will continue to do so. Para 7 touches on SQ examinations, and we heard from Stuart earlier on that particular regard. And in paragraph 8, we acknowledge the work of our ASN schools with supporting our most vulnerable children during the period of the lockdown, as well as those in mainstream schools who did likewise. And reference is made in this report to some of the supports that have been put in place, for example, on mental health and wellbeing, and there's a link there to resources provided by our psychological services team. Looking at paras 9 to 10, we do refer to the dynamic changes the Council has had to address in respect of transport, free school meals, on health and safety matters like ventilation, and we will continue to monitor and address these important points and note that our modern school estate has placed us in a good position compared to some other local authorities, so we should take our pride in that. And coming close to the end, we have in Appendix 1 provided a summary of a timeline of the key announcements for reference, which is hopeful to committee members. So, Chair, I appreciate that this has been a quick walkthrough of some of the major steps taken to support children and young people back to school, which have been taken on board, as colleagues have said this morning, through our staff in schools. It has definitely been a challenge. So in summary, I asked the Education and Resources Committee this morning to approve and to endorse the following recommendations set out in paragraph 2. And that's number 1, to recognise the efforts of staff in schools and educational settings to continue to adapt to the changing guidance and being agile to respond and ensure the safety and well-being of children, young people and staff. Number 2, to note the partnership arrangements and protocols in place with NHSL, who lead on the incident management of cases, and that continues to operate on a daily basis to ensure that the well-being of individuals is at the heart of the assessment process for each case, and that this be noted. Number 3, the arrangements for welcoming children and young people back to nursery and school from the 22nd of February, and indeed from yesterday, the 15th of March, be noted. And lastly, that the Minister's announcement on the 2nd of March on the return of all pupils to full-time in primary and all secondary schools part-time on a phased basis from the 15th of March be noted, and you will have heard of the progress made again this morning. So, Chair, these are the recommendations the committee is asked to note and endorse this morning. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Des. Very comprehensive report, obviously contains a lot, and it was particularly useful to have the timetable that sort of laid out at the end there of all of the things that have happened. I've got Councillor Dryborough asking to speak just now.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Des, I think it's a really helpful report, and I like the timeline. I think there might be a typo at the very start of the timeline, because it says August 2021 on the Appendix 1 on page 95, but I think that anyway. But
Gold star, Councillor Dryborough.
No, it was really just to point out. But what I will say is, I just think I'm kind of amazed that you've actually managed to get everything in place, because in my ward this week I have had so many, ASN pupils who have had to, getting back to high school, getting transport arranged, obviously the limitations. I just think between an announcement being made by the First Minister and then what is expected for the council to have in place for the last couple of weeks just before the Easter holidays in order to get some part-time back at school, I think is a massive achievement that we've, as a council, we've actually managed to get it in place. I think the logistics of getting the transport with the social distancing, etc., I think are absolutely. I just think I'm really quite shocked that we've actually managed to achieve it. So I think well done to everybody involved in that, because it is a massive undertaking.
Yeah, very much appreciated, Councillor, and I think that emphasises what we've always said. It's not any one person, as you've said, it's a we, and it's right across the council services, and indeed the support from elected members, which we never underestimate. We never underestimate that at all, and that certainly makes a difference. So much appreciated.
Thank you both. Any further comments or questions on this report just now? Okay, happy to accept the recommendations at 2.
Agreed.
Thank you everybody. Okay, we're moving on to item 11 just now, which begins on page 97 of your pack, and this is about new nutritional requirements for food and drink in schools, new regulations which are coming into place, and Lynn Sherry is going to take us through this. Thanks, Lynn.
Morning, everyone. Really just to take you through this report, the purpose of the report is to provide an update on the implementation of the new nutritional requirements for food and drink in our schools. In terms of background, just at section 3, the Scottish Government reviewed the regulations that govern the food and drinks in our schools currently and conducted a survey and piece of research through use of a technical working group. They use consultation from the public, and that was done a number of years ago now, summer 2018. The outcome and the proposed changes in the implementation date of autumn 20 obviously changed because of the pandemic, but we are on track now that this has been extended to April. So as of next month, we will move to being fully compliant with the nutritional standards as set down. In terms of the working group and the work that they undertook, it really focused on aligning the school food regulations with the national dietary goals of Scotland, and the acknowledgement really that the Scottish population continues to consume too many calories, too much fat, too much salt and too much sugar. The nutritional standards for our schools are therefore aimed at aligning with the national dietary goals to help change the nation's eating habits. So you can see at paragraph 3.5, there's some bullet points there of some of the changes that will come into play about providing more fruit and vegetables with all of our meals, about restricting the amount of red and red processed meats, increasing our fibre intake, and also restricting consumption of confectionery, chocolate, crisps, cakes, etc. Really the overarching aim of this, although it's about food being served in schools, really should be of an exemplar healthier choice. That's what it should be. And we know that there will be some challenge in that, and it does require a coordinated approach across the council between our colleagues in facility services, our catering staff, and also our school staff, teachers, school support assistants, and everyone, in order to really promote the positive ethos that we're going to need to bring about cultural change. What I would point out, I think it's important to point out that facilities have worked behind the scenes, if you like, for the last few years, knowing that this was going to be coming into play, and they have gradually introduced some of the main changes that are expected of the new regulations and the new standards, so that we hope that the reaction should be less kind of obvious and less negative as people might be expecting once we introduce the changes. To point out really that it's not just about lunchtime, it goes across the school day, so it will include breakfast clubs, tuck shops, vending machines, and it also will include sort of before and after school clubs as well. So really building on that ethos of health promotion wherever our children are involved. Section 6 of the report talks about actions taken to implement the new standards, and there are some bullet points in there about, as I've mentioned, the compliance with our menus, that we were already a significant part of the way there. But we will be fully compliant come April, that we have nutritional analysis software in place to make sure that that remains the same. And in terms of support for implementation, we produced online and other training documents that have been used by all of the catering staff, have been used by our school support assistants, and we're currently rolling that out to our teacher complement as well. Again, to bring about the importance of why we're doing this, to understand the changes and to be part of that ethos of promoting healthy eating. In terms of PR, the next few weeks you will see some PR coming out, which should help parents and parent councils to understand more about the changes that are coming and what the benefits are for us all. And to mention timescales, as I said, it was delayed, but April 21 is the new start date for these regulations, and we will be ready to go fully compliant the week beginning the 26th once schools return from the spring break. we do have here at committee this morning somewhere, we have Jerry Donicky. I'm sure many of you know Jerry. He's our Facility Services Manager in Community and Enterprise. So he's in charge of catering in our schools and has been heavily involved behind the scenes in working towards being compliant with the regulations. We thought it'd be useful to bring Jerry along this morning. So if there was any particular questions, Jerry would be here to answer those questions. So in terms of the report and recommendations, it's really just that committee are asked to note the content of the report and happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Lynn, and welcome Jerry as well. We've got 3 questions in just now. I'll start with Councillor Nayland, please.
Thank you, Chair. I really do welcome any move towards encouraging healthy eating, and there's obviously been a lot of work put into this. But I do have a couple of questions. I appreciate the sugar content of fruit juice, but it's such an easy way to get one of the 5 a day into resistant children. It seems a shame that it's been reduced or removed in some cases. I can see that you've switched to low-fat dairy products, but there's no mention of restricting or reducing cheese and whether the cheese is low-fat as well. Because quite often that is worse for fat and salt content than processed red meat. And on the subject of meat, I've seen no mention of meat-free alternatives being made available, such as soya and corn products, and whether there's been any exploration done into whether any such products would be considered to be genetically modified. It was a question that I raised quite some time ago, but I never unfortunately got a response. So any information on that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Jerry, would you like to take some of those?
No
now?
problem.
Thanks.
In terms of the fruit juices, there's a balance to be made between reducing sugar and the dental issue that's associated with taking fruit juices. So they have been looked at by the board that set up this these regulations, and balanced, they've decided to remove fruit juice. Yes, it is popular, but that is one of the compromises they had to make, that we're really promoting water as the most healthiest drink to take. In terms of alternatives to meat, we already have corn in some of our recipes. We've started using that about 2 years ago, and we already look at alternatives to having meat-free days. We have, over the past 2 years, modified all recipes so that, as Lynn said when she was going through the report there, so that we don't suffer from a big bang effect. In reading the new regulations, it would probably frighten everybody that it's quite restrictive. However, over the course of a 2-year period, we have modified all the recipes. And in fact, of the 14 new standards that have been introduced, we're actually only affected by 4, in the sense that, in a couple of the headlines at the fore are that we have to provide at least 2 portions of vegetables and 1 portion of fruit every day with every meal. We already give the choice of 2 veg and a piece of fruit, but now we have to include it with every meal. So that's one of the 4. The other one is we are only allowed to give 175 grams of red and red processed meat. Over the past 2 years, we've slowly reduced the amount of ham baguettes, etc. In the red process. So we're very near there. There's only slight changes that we'll make. And in fact, when the parents see the actual menus themselves, they will not notice an awful lot of difference, because before we introduce a new recipe or a new menu item into the menu planning, we trial it in 17 schools and take the feedback from the pupils of those 17 schools, so that we know before we actually introduce it across the board that it actually works. So I'm really confident that we've done everything we can and it won't be such a big bang.
Thank you for that, but I actually asked whether you were using reduced fat cheese and whether investigations have been undertaken to ascertain whether corn products would be considered to be genetically modified.
we already use reduced fat cheese. That was introduced about 3-4 years ago, and the corn products we use have not been genetic. We do not have any GM foods on our menus. That's one of the pledges that we put in every single menu.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, Councillor. I feel we should put in one of those disclaimers that other meat substitutes are available as well as corn. I think we're speaking about it in general terms. I've got Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, I welcome this report. I think it's absolutely the right way to be going, and we have to direct in order to change eating habits. I definitely get that. I mean, my grandchildren would not go and pick up a fizzy drink. They would go and pick up water, and that is because they have been from a very, very early age taught that water and milk are the two drinks that they ask for or go and get, and they don't question it. What I would like to ask is, I'm obviously heavily involved in the fair trade, and I know quite a lot of our schools are fair trade, take up the fair trade. So are we using fair trade products in the meals that we provide at the schools, or for the snacks or for the breakfast clubs and for the lunch clubs? Also, the other point I would like to make is, because of lockdown, and this really has shocked me, and that's why I'm saying we have to lead from the front. If anybody goes to McDonald's and all the outlets, the carry food, the carry outlets, it is unbelievable. You can't get roundabouts because of the amount of cars that are going for their lunch break and buying the McDonald's or the Kentucky Frieds. It is really, really worrying. And that is what children are learning. You don't cook your dinner, you go to the carry out place to get it. And that worries me, really worries me. And that's been so noticeable since lockdown.
I'll come back to your fair trade question in a second, because you're not going to like my answer on that. But just to give you a wee bit of encouragement first, during lockdown, we put a few recipes online for parents to try. And we thought we'd maybe get a negative reaction because we're not allowed to add salt to any recipe. And the most popular ones that turned out were chicken curry and macaroni cheese. And it was amazing the positive feedback we got. And it was just really starting from scratch, cooking a meal and no adding salt, because the parents thought, no, you have to add salt. When the kids were telling them, no, we love the school chicken curry, we love the school macaroni, but it didn't. Unfortunately, I'm not going to give you a positive answer in fair trade, other than that we have a fair trade fortnight promotion in the schools. I've got a balance to make of trying to purchase locally as opposed to fair trade, so my apologies for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, it was a slight interruption going on here at the moment. Councillor Dryborough, please.
Thanks, Chair. It was really just a question for Jerry. Myself and my children have always had an allergy towards aspartame, and during when they've been at school, there was never any use of aspartame, artificial sweetener, in any of the stuff at school. I'm just wondering, when I see a lot of the no added sugar, will there be an increase in it? Will there be any artificial sweeteners used instead, or will that still be the case, that there'll be no aspartame?
There still won't be any aspartame. The manufacturers are getting very clever with the sweeteners they're putting in. It's mostly the saccharine instead of aspartame. We try to steer away from as much as possible, obviously because of the hydrogenated fats. So I'm not aware. My menu development officer would come to me because she knows I've got a thing about aspartame. So no, there's no aspartame.
Brilliant, thank you.
Apologies, I'm muted. Councillor Walker, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, I agree. This is a really good report, and the impact, I think, of obesity in terms of the population in the NHS. I mean, not more so demonstrated by having come through this pandemic. What I would say though is in terms of communication and engagement, you have to get people on board with it. So I would just like to kind of stress it needs to be a really sort of positive campaign around it. There's, for example, there's a line in the report just now that says the population is eating too many calories. So, I mean, obviously you need to be careful about how you come at that, because people, I think, are probably kind of running out of patience a wee bit in terms of being told what to do. They've virtually been imprisoned in their houses for 10 months over the last year. And again, back to Mary's point, I think that's an excellent point. Lockdown has been a disaster in terms of lack of exercise and just going to the carry out and all the rest of it. So we need to be careful around the communication and engagement campaign. It needs to be very, very positive in terms of trying to get people on board with it, obviously particularly parents, because the last thing you want is them boycotting school lunches and going to the fish and chip shop, which has happened. If you remember the whole Jamie Oliver thing, people just boycotted all the school meals and went out to the carry out. So I think we can't sort of overemphasise how important it is to communicate this, and it's not in a kind of lecturing fashion. I know that might sound obvious, but if you even read parts of the report, which is fine for this forum, but it's, you know, I wouldn't like to, you know, maybe as a parent be out there saying you are eating too many calories. So as well as being locked in your house and all the rest of it, now you have to stop eating the stuff that you like. So it needs to be a really, really positive campaign, I think, to get people on board. Thank you.
What we've got week commencing the 19th of April is a series of animations will be released through the council, Tom Little's team, and it'll be the week before the launch on the 26th. And I've seen them; they're very positive.
Thank you very much, Jerry. And it's back to what you were saying earlier as well about these changes being introduced gradually. So I suppose you could almost consider it a soft launch from that point of view as well. A lot of the changes have actually been introduced over the past wee while. If there's no further comments on this, then are we happy to accept the report as it is?
Agreed.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, moving on to final item just now, which begins on page 106 in your pack, and this is on the West Partnership Improvement Collaborative, and this is on the interim action plan from January of this year, and Carol's going to present this for us. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the West Partnership's draft interim action plan. Section 3 outlines some background. There was a previous paper brought to committee in October 2020 where the progress of the West Partnership was noted, and that focused around the West Partnership's improvement plan, which was written to cover the period of 2020 to 2023. Now, the purpose of this improvement plan is to capture the areas where we will be better working together in collaboration with some other local authorities in order to maximise our impact and our resources. However, the West Partnership's improvement plan doesn't replicate our own individual resource plans, which are purely focused on our own local authority. So it was decided that the improvement plan as is needed a bit of revision, really due to the response that was required due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and an interim draft update was written to ensure that the revised needs of schools and local authorities were captured within this revision. So the plan is organised under 3 areas. These are collaborative learning networks, which focus on making sure that people are working effectively together and supporting each other. There is a plan around curriculum learning and teaching, and one around leadership, empowerment and improvement. There's also a 4th work stream, that of evaluation and reporting. So section 4 gives you the updated position in terms of the West Partnership's improvement plan and details the interim action plan, which is attached to this report as Appendix 1. And that was drawn up, as I say, to address the challenges of this current period within education. It is actually based almost entirely on the existing plan that was already presented to committee, but it does recognise the need to prioritise some areas and also to move faster in some areas, while also recognising that while that happens, that some other aspects of work may have to be paused in order to focus on certain priorities. So if members can be referred to this interim action plan, it identifies 7 priority projects, and each have a particular and a specific relevance during this period of restrictions due to COVID-19. And they include supporting our leadership capacity within our schools, leadership activities, supporting head teachers. There is a work stream around supporting learners with additional support needs, and an important development in terms of tracking learners' well-being, which we feel will be a key priority as we move towards recovery, and that was alluded to in the previous report. There's also a significant work stream around our national digital learning offer through the West Partnership, the West Online School, and members will have noted from the previous report that this has been highly and significantly accessed by our schools during this period of remote learning. So members are asked to note the addition of this interim improvement plan, and if I could refer members back to section 2, the recommendation that committee is asked to approve that the West Partnerships interim action plan be noted. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Carol, for that update. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this report just now? Oh, okay. Thank you. Happy to agree the recommendations.
Agreed.
Agreed. Great. Thank you. That is us, everybody. I don't have any items of urgent business. Thank you very much for your attendance and for all of your questions and comments this morning, for officers for going through the reports. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 1st of June, to my recollection, 1st of June. So hope to see you then, if not before, and thank you very much for today.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah.